while to get through. And let me just make sure your audio is fine. If it comes in too loud at all, just let me know. But let's go full stream.
All right, let's just get this out of the way for everything that we're about to talk about in this video. If you're watching and you know who I am and go, wait a minute, that guy works for Riot Games on the LCS.
Yep, there we go.
And you're right. And I was privy to a lot of conversations prior to this announcement being made and talking about what was going to happen potentially. So, yeah, that is true. And you might see some of the things I say that might agree with Riot. You'll go, wait a minute, that guy's just saying that because he's a shill for Riot and he's just trying to make it sound better. Or if I disagree, but I don't go as vehemently or fervently as the rest of the community, then it's like, well, he's pulling punches because he doesn't want to slam Riot as hard as he should or something. And you know,
I'll let him finish.
you know what? Honestly, you're not even necessarily wrong. Like, yeah, I work for Riot, and like, I do have to balance this weird position of being a public figure who makes third-party content while also still appearing on the broadcast and all this stuff. That said, with this video, I do want to try to be honest, at least in the places that I do agree and the places that I think are yet to be seen and must be proven to be true.
So, Markz, kudos to him for putting this out, because this could potentially, if done incorrectly, if the wrong person just doesn't like it, like this could be one of those things that like banishes you from the LCS forever. So kudos to Mark for stepping out and making this, because I guarantee, I mean, I'm curious to see how hard he goes. I can't imagine it's going to be too hard. It'll probably be mostly in line with everything that was said on Hotline League, but we will see.
And as well as kind of acknowledge that, like, why fans feel bad right now, because I don't think the conversation and PR by Riot around this change was suitable for a lot of the people that they are screwing over in a lot of what feels like the core
myself
fan base,
included,
by moving it to a time slot that they can no longer watch, despite being some of the most ardent supporters of the league throughout its history. And so I definitely want to acknowledge that and at least try to show that I'm participating in this conversation. I'm not trying to hide it or anything, but I'm walking a fine line a little bit here, and I'm just going to try and do my best to give fans something to think about moving forward. And I'm not going to reveal any new information, but at least try and help you dig into the pieces that make the most sense and like what you should be looking for potentially in the future. So I just finished recording the video, and I will just want to put a disclaimer that I'm sorry that this is really rambly. I hope you guys can
but that's the whole point. It's supposed to be rambly.
Fine line that I'm trying to walk.
We like the rambly.
Giving something that you will all appreciate while not overstepping on information I might know that is not public, or saying something that is going to hurt the product in the long run, or just like, you know.
That actually brings up a great point. I wonder how much information, like these conversations have been going on for 5 or 6 months. Imagine the info that's known behind the scenes that we just don't.
Piss people off. Like I am still trying to be a little political here, obviously, and so finding that exact line probably made this a little bit ramblier than it should have been, and I apologize for that. I also apologize if you guys watching feel like I missed the mark at all. You know, like, I'm trying my best to give answers that I think will satisfy you and raise questions and be important. And
yeah, but you can't come out and just be like, screw the LCS.
But
yeah, this is a horrible decision, et cetera, et cetera. He's not.
Hope you guys enjoyed.
Would
One
not
thing
be
I
allowed
want
to
to say
do
is
that.
to just give Lance like the slightest bit of hope. And we talked about this a little bit on Hotline League last night. But the league is not dead. There's a feeling that like it's being moved here for the explicit purpose to drop viewership, so then they can kill it and shoot it in the head or something. And that's just not really their reason for doing this at all. I can at least come out and say that is just patently not true. Travis talked about this a little bit about how Riot as a company has a pretty big ego, and that's definitely true. They want everything they do to kind of feel like the premiere of that X thing. If they're gonna make an animated show, it's gonna be the best goddamn animated show ever made about a video game, you know. And if they're gonna throw,
but the problem with that ego, and the reason why so many people have issues with this, and why I'm concerned about this in general, why I wouldn't call it dead, but people were worried about it dying, is that ego pulling the plug on it early because it's not up to the standards of bars set elsewhere. And it's one of those, like, do you let, horrible metaphor, but like, do you let something go with like a severe injury, or do you just put it down?
That's esports events, they want them to be really, really cool and hype. And I think for North America, the viewership has been trending down. They're trying to make something to reverse that trend, make something really exciting and new. We'll have to see if that works, but the idea that they are trying to kill it is just not aligned. Like, they don't want
they're not
that
trying to.
Embarrassment, honestly, on their hands.
They might passively be doing so.
Failed. One of the premier regions where the game started, honestly, in North America, is where the first servers were and everything. As well as the fact that, like, I can say that just how they view global esports is that they do want to have a global feel, and it's not just going to be like, no more LCS, it's dead. no more, straight up non-existent. There will be a North American scene as long as there is a global League of Legends scene. Now, dead, I know on the internet is largely often hyperbole. So, dead might mean just when you start the stream, in January for this new broadcast time, and there's, I don't know, worst case scenario, 30K viewers or something like that. Like, yeah, people are going to call that dead. Even if there is still infrastructure and teams and players and all this stuff going on, and if you as a fan can still watch during that time, it might feel,
for 30,000 viewers, nobody should ever be making above $100,000 in salary.
I also want to say that, like, it's not like it's ever going to fully die
just
as
the
long as there
sad
is
reality of it.
League esports as a whole going on. And so if you are a fan of North America and this is a scary time for you, trust me, it's a fucking scary time for me. All right, I've been here and watched every single LCS game ever.
Your job
since
is
the beginning.
online.
I was watching in season 2, most of season 1 as well. Like before LCS was a thing, I've been around. It's now my full-time job. I care very, very deeply about the success of this. And so on that sense, like, yes, I feel, you can imagine, very similar to how you feel, whether it be the concern, the fear, upset, like whatever it is, those emotions are in this body too. All right.
And
but what I want to do is
try
and at least, not have everyone. A lot of people are jumping ship, and I understand why. But for people who do want to stay on, let's talk about it. So there are a couple things that I want to dig into with these actual changes. First is the day change from weekend to Thursday, Friday. Then there's the time
which I don't think
change.
many people are going to have
not
problems
really. They're
with.
keeping the time the
I
same.
think Mark
towards
should do a
noon
good
from
job
1 to
of
noon, actually, I think it is
explaining that
and why that is being made. Then there is
even though
the overall ecosystem philosophies, which I guess tie into those two as well.
Would
but then
still
also,
rather it be on
Valorant
weekends,
has kind of been,
obviously.
this extra little sprinkle of drama thrown on top. So we'll dig into all three of those kinds of topics. So the first thing is moving from weekends and kind of overlapping with the LEC and moving to weekdays. Now, the big reason that they are making this is a lot of data that they've said they've been collecting over the last year. And I think you'll find that a lot of the reasons given are very much data-driven reasons, which can sometimes lead to the right decisions that feel often terrible for the people who are being misplaced by said data-driven decision. And so I think in this case, this marketing and conversation around it being so data-driven has sometimes made this feel worse for the fans that are being affected. And I will say also that this first article that came out was very much targeting the global broader ecosystem, and I can understand not wanting to have a big pandering like, hey, NA fans, hear how you feel about it. Because, for LCK, there were some changes I know some people weren't super thrilled about either over there. And, that's for that community to discuss. I'm not on the know about how, like, LCK
I think the
fans
general,
feel
like,
about
the
that.
bigger article
but-
did a good job of, like, laying out all the broad points that they wanted to cover in regards to the day changes, the time changes. Like, I think they did a
we
good
did
job.
get
It's just the
later
LCS individually
NA specific
that dropped the
combo
ball.
that came out, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a second. But at least the change from weekend to weekday, as covered in this first article, was talking a lot about some of the concerns that people have about modern viewership trends, about carving out time for each league to exist on its own, so that if you want to watch a major region, there is kind of like one going at that time, and everyone can watch that one league. So if you might be an EU LCS fan, but there's no EU LCS on, but you know that there's, hey, at least North America.
What I don't understand is, like, if everybody's one group, why not just combine them into a global league at this
which
point?
makes some of the wording
That's
about,
the part that
what
I
choice
don't.
did you make? All a little flat.
If
for me
you're
a little bit,
thinking
because,
about
well,
it
what
from
if
a
you're a French
global
fan
perspective, but
and the LCS is
constantly
on
having to
LFL,
separate
you're
out the
probably watching
regions
LFL,
and
like,
not giving
who
the
knows?
right
Anyway, that's
love
neither
to
here nor there.
everybody.
The point being, they want to carve out time slots for each one. There's also concern about burnout for viewers if they feel tired at the end of a LoL esports
That is a
day, like
fact.
they've consumed too much content.
I very
and
much feel
wanting
that.
to make it so that they don't stack days of best of ones or whatever the formats end up being, at least not stacking leagues against each other, so you go one into the other into the next. There are also just general Twitch trends that people have kind of talked about, and they didn't reference directly here, but it's been communicated in Reddit comments as much that I feel like it's pretty obvious why this is being done. There is larger Twitch viewership during the weekday than weekend overall. And so the idea is, if you are competing between EU and NA for viewers, if people are burning out, they feel like they have to choose between which league they want to invest their time into versus kind of just always having a league to watch. You say, okay, well, if we move it to the weekday and there's this bigger pie available, maybe we can carve out a piece of that pie there, and we'll give the other piece of the pie, which is a separate pie over here for the weekends and weekday, and we can go find a time slot. And additionally with that, when this kind of gets into the week, the actual time slot, which I'll put off for just a little bit, but, of course, you want to then go, of course, where that pie is biggest, which is noon around that time when Europe is still awake, East Coast is awake, West Coast is awake, everyone's on Twitch at that time. And if you go live, then you go, well, maybe I can.
Okay, this is the one thing that I don't think enough people have addressed when it comes to the Twitch data and Twitch viewership, is that there's a massive difference between an active viewer and a passive viewer. An active viewer is somebody who's going to watch the game but also be engaged in surrounding social media. They're going to tweet about it. They're going to post on Instagram or anything. Like, they're going to actively be watching and discussing and talking to their friends, or just engage with the product in a way that is more indicative of diehard fandom to a certain extent and dedication. And then there's the passive viewer, which the passive viewer is just going to be the one that has it on in the background of work, is doing other things, not really fully paying attention. They're there because it's something in the background, or they might want to watch it, but they can't give their attention to it. And there's a very clear distinction between the two. Hey, Con, how's it going? And I feel like not enough people are recognizing that, where it's like, yeah, sure, viewership might be higher on the weekdays, but that could also be because people have it on in the background as they do other things. Now, Travis just brought up a tweet a little bit ago that was like 17% of the workforce works from home. And then you include, so the demographic's kind of hard to nail down because Riot nor the LCS has talked about where the demographic breakout is. But whenever you throw in your college kids and your high school kids in there, the majority of people likely watching during the day are watching it passively, not actively. I can't imagine like it's the same as like a weekend. So I'd rather have 100,000 viewers on the weekend that are actively engaged with the product and actively talking about it and promoting it than 120,000 who are not as active, not as vocal, and are just there for the sake of being there. I don't know.
And get the biggest slice of the biggest pie possible. However, the more contentious point to me is the data-driven approach that they're taking. We've talked about this a little bit, but like the thing about a data-driven argument that you're presenting to fans is that you kind of need to provide at least some of the data that is going to sway
you
their opinion
cannot
and
just
talk a little
talk
bit
about
openly
data
about it.
and not
in both
give
these
it.
articles, there's a lot of conversation about like, well, the research says this, and based off the findings that we've had this, and blah, blah, blah. But they don't really give you the nuggets to make those pills more palatable to swallow necessarily. Like, yeah, you can give me the conclusion from your data, but if you don't walk me through the thought process too much, then it's hard for a lot of fans to grasp that, especially the ones who are most negatively affected. I think there are a lot of fans who are very reasonable, where if you pitch them on like, yeah, we're really sorry that this is hurting you, but we really do think it's in the best long-term interest of the league, and you go out with some empathy and explain that like you acknowledge the reason that they're upset while pitching them this, then like that's kind of the angle you have to go. And like only a couple little nuggets of stats were given, like viewer burnout for like why they're changing, but not specifically like this is 100% why this is the right time and we are really sorry. I feel like it both lacked that empathy approach, as well as if you are going data driven and you're going to keep saying data driven, research this, research that like you kind of need to provide your findings a little bit. And I felt it was a little lacking in that, as well as the fact that I've already covered some of the reasons to disagree, or like how there's contrary data that is also not really being acknowledged. So there's the reasoning.
To the point of the time slot being the issue more than the weekday, I think it's just because we've accepted it. And it's like the biggest thing with the day change, though, that I refuse to believe, in addition to the active versus passive viewer during weekdays and weekends, it's just the numbers show that when it comes to sports, when it comes to any sort of engagement, the reason why you typically had them on weekends was so that people could go to the events, because you have more time on the weekends. If you want to take a Saturday out to go to a college football game or a basketball game, etc., there's a reason why those perform incredibly well. By all means, weekday events can still go well. Look at college basketball, for example. They like Duke and UNC will pack out their respective arena or respective indoor stadiums every time during the weekday and weekend. But the ancillary activities that you do on the weekend besides that generate so much more than the weekdays. And it's like, I get there's a lot of people that work in retail and sales that have the demographic isn't just one group of people, but I refuse to believe that the majority are not people that are not busy from the normal 9 to 5 hour in some capacity with school, work, anything else. Like, I find that so impossible to believe. But the problem is that's all overridden by the fact that they don't care about North American viewers. It is about attracting that European viewer, which I think is just a horrible philosophy to have. I really do. It is the NA league. If you can't grow it on NA fans, then you don't resort to EU viewership. League of Legends category is 47% more viewers than weekdays. Let's just split up. No, I get they want to split it up, and that's fine, but like the problem is, and I get why we were chosen to do it, because we are the sacrificial lamb, so to speak. We are not as big as the LEC. The LEC is the more important product, but I don't know.
Around going from weekend to weekday, there obviously
exactly it needs to be much later in the day,
both philosophically as well
which
as
it's
data
not.
to back it up. It's not just hey fuck UNA, which I know some people feel like it is, but I will say on
it
this
passively
angle
is.
of
No, okay, no, that's the point. It passively is. You are saying fuck you to NA without saying it. Like, it's not directly saying like, oh, like Riot's not out to get us, but like all these little actions add up and they hurt.
You're going to hear about it a lot, about the reasons that things are happening. But anytime you take a data-driven argument, it feels like, for me, there's always like, well, what about the opposing data? And this is something that gets a little bit into corporate PR, which I admit I am not an expert on. But there is a lack of acknowledgement of the counter arguments that also use data. And this is something that I feel like, at least as an individual, when I do PR and when I present arguments, I like to present the other side. I like to steel man it a little bit, as people say. I don't want to straw man it. And by at least acknowledging the other side.
I get that they can't use the Valorant and LCS thing, but the problem is all of these things go in combination with each other. And when you say that, oh, we can't use the same arena and we have to pick one over the other, like, and it's easier to move the LCS there. Why? Because the LCS is the inferior product, quote unquote, to the LEC. Therefore, it's just better for us to put Valorant here. Well, again, all of them combine together to equal that. What they say is their justification. Words and actions are two different things. And your actions, when taken all together, add up to a different story than what the words might necessarily be saying, because the words are nothing but PR speak.
And at least some of its talking points, you then, if you disagree with it, hopefully find common ground to the average viewer. I know the art of finding common ground is not the strongest it's ever been on the internet these days, but I do think it's important, at least for if you're a fan who's pissed off right now, to be like, hey, here are some of the things that you're probably concerned about. And I don't feel like Riot attempted to do that at all. It kind of just felt like, this will be great, more people available, and then you're like, well, but I was just screwed over, and like, how am I supposed to feel? And they didn't really one, acknowledge like the damage that was potentially being done, as well as things that happened previously in the past that gives opposing data to the ones that they're pushing now. For example, there's been a lot of times that esports have been on during the weekday. And in this article, they kind of say over the last year, I'm looking at LPL, LCK, and some of the VCT stuff during the weekday, they feel like the weekday can support esports. There are a couple things around the data that I don't think were fully explained, researched, or maybe hand-waved away because they don't like where that line of logic goes. For example, if viewer burnout is high at the end of the day, that they're saying that, that could also just be because of format or other reasons. It's not necessarily that there's two broadcasts stacked together.
I do think
stacking broadcasts actually usually does help viewership as well. People who are burnt out will churn out and not watch. That's a concern. But you also have people who aren't burnt out, watched for one thing, and now another thing starting, and they go, all right, I'll watch this too. You know, the same way that TV channels kind of stack their things together, it can happen with hosting as well. It is also true that like most of the time
fair
that
counterpoint,
people
actually
end up doing weekdays, it's almost more out of necessity than it being optimal. Whether that be because the schedule is so big you need to put it on there, or you're avoiding conflicts, like again, which is kind of happening here. Because multiple times, even in just specifically League esports history, they have.
I agree with you on the burnout point. The format doesn't feel. I honestly for a while was like, yeah, 10 hours of League of Legends is a lot. As somebody who watches both the LEC and the LCS, it does feel draining by the end of the day to watch both of them combined. But that said, I still like having that option there. And if whichever league is more interesting and presents itself better at the time is the one I'm going to make sure I watch. I agree that I think the format could do a lot to alleviate that. I think that actually counters one of the points very, very well.
Tried to use weekdays and they have not worked. There was Monday Night League, Friday Night League. Both those were failures, and I think you can argue that time slot point.
Call of Duty was on weekdays for a very long period of time.
A lot of the audience could not watch, and that's a big thing that people don't realize about the North American audience is that it is very heavily driven or involved with EU viewership. Going all the way back to the start of the LCS, and this will also tie into weekday as well, but so much of North America's viewership has also included European fans. Way back in the day, EU LCS for 2013, 14, 15, and I believe 16 ran on Thursday, Friday. And NA had exclusively Saturday, Sunday between English-speaking fans, basically. Yeah, there were the nighttime broadcasts of OGN and those kinds of things. But like during the day for when most people are awake, it was just NA. And so, of course, viewership was significantly higher when European fans did not have to watch only could watch us and didn't watch EU LCS and then fuck off because
I'm curious to see if the LEC gets a boost at all.
NA was given kind of
this is phenomenal points,
and it honestly was kind of favoritism because back then there was also internally in the office kind of this political rift going on between EU and NA, and EU kind of feeling like they were the redhead stepchild, not given the resources that they felt like they deserved or the same opportunities that North America got, and that was a bit of a tension point during those times.
So I want to make this comment here. So as you guys know, I got to go to a Riot event and talk to a bunch of people from Riot. And you can sense that rivalry between EU and NA. Even within the people there, like you can tell. And it's one of those where like, yeah, good rivalries can push each other further. In this case, I don't know.
And one of those was indeed weekday versus weekend, and NA for years kind of reaped the benefits of being the one on the weekend. And EU pushed back against that and slowly moved in. And I believe it was 2017 when they ended up getting Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Or maybe it was
things started building in 2018
because they were also doing best of twos. This is when they started doing all the weird
they do.
Best of twos, best of threes between EU and NA. And
they very
EU
much
viewership
do.
During that time hit the lowest ever between North America and European viewership for a split. They average, and this is using publicly available data, but they average just above 100,000. Even this last split for NA, which everyone is saying is fucking dog shit and it's the end of the world, dead league and all this stuff, it was still better than what EU averaged in 2017. Now again, formats made this a little bit different, but at least you can see that like when shit hit the fan for Europe, they made the decision to invest into that league and double down and give it the resources and not treating it like, again, feeling like the redheaded stepchild, and kind of gave them the things that they were looking for. And I think that helped revitalize the league.
I did not know. So that was before my time. I started watching consistently in 2018 whenever the LEC just started popping off, obviously. 2017, I would watch off and on, like only when TSM was playing, realistically. And it's like, it's so fascinating to see how things have flipped entirely, because I've heard that narrative for years. Like I've known that, you know, NA got preferential treatment for a while, and that's why we were hitting the viewership numbers that we were. But like, wow.
League. People often think about the
I didn't think it was that bad.
You know, like that's kind of what saved it, or maybe it was the competitive angle with G2 and what happened at Worlds in 2018 and all this.
No, it was all around
2018, 2019, 2020. But I think that there was also a lot of like just behind the scenes stuff that fans would be privy to, that like EU was kind of finally given its own space to be itself. And yes, that
I know it like separated from Riot NA.
But also just like a lot of systemic logistical things that were kind of cleaned up during this time. It sounds like to me, as someone who is not super in the know on this kind of stuff, but just hearing about it. And that kind of helped EU grow. But part of it was getting a better time slot for them and for their audience, for people who are now no longer working, and then they can just go and play the game, or you know, be done on the weekend and watch. And so this moving NA back to this time slot that EU previously didn't want, that people had previously argued was not good, feels a little counterintuitive to me to now be like, oh, well, the times have changed, it's fine now. Maybe that's the case, but I'm not super convinced.
No, they have not
been here the entire time.
I refuse to believe they've changed all that much.
Weekday time slots for people. So I am hesitant still. Like I said, I'm not going to agree with every single choice that Riot made here. The data that they do present is true, and I acknowledge that there is reasoning and stuff like that, but there's these other kind of counter arguments that have not been acknowledged. And again, this is maybe the PR angle from a company, which is like, just don't
protect Mark at all costs, please. Hashtag save Markz.
don't give your opponent ammo, versus me, where I individually like to say, like, hey, here's some other stuff to consider. And they didn't really argue about that. Just to address another thing that the community is talking about, they're saying, if we are moving to weekdays anyways, why not experiment with this format a little bit more, go to best of three, spread it out across the days.
Why not?
And broadcast, best of threes, 2 of them a day, every day of the week, or something like that, And the reality is that turning on the lights and running the league itself has a cost. You have to pay all of us to show up there, the power to go on there.
Fair, but the LEC showed that you can do all that mostly within the same parameters and same days. Like a format change you could keep mostly the same by cutting out some of the best of ones. Like you increase a little bit of time, but not all that much. I don't buy. I'd have to be shown the numbers that prove otherwise to believe that. Yeah, it sucks that Markz should be getting a bonus for the video, but he's not going to. And that's the thing, is like they're not going to talk about it further.
Security
like Riot's not going to mention it at all, unless like
which is
the
just
press
a whole
like
other
really kind of jumps on
I have no idea what the look or feel of the studio will be right now. Can't actually answer that for you. But on that idea, it just like the costs go up if you spread it out, and it's not immediately
every
clear
year
that the profits will rise as well, because in theory you can argue, okay, well, we spread out, there's now more viewership, more things to cover. That means that there's more time for ad revenue, and there's more time.
Oh, don't get me started on ad revenue. Oh, I hate this. I'm sure he'll bring up the fact that like EU viewers are not going to guarantee the same amount of sponsorship dollars, given that American sponsors don't want to advertise to EU audiences, given that we are different products. Like State Farm and Verizon cannot sell to an EU viewer versus how they can sell at North American fans. But it's just like I brought this point up 2 years ago now, and it's just been constantly debating it, where it's like, if you want to increase revenues, you have to open up additional revenue streams. You cannot keep maintaining the status quo. So by all means, like I'm all for change to a certain extent, but you at some point have to introduce additional revenue streams, whether it's ticket sales, food and beverage, merchandise, like literally anything that you can do to help, that you can add on to the experience and add additional revenues without increasing costs too much is needed. People say that like the live events are very cost heavy. How do we make live events profitable? Like, how do we make sure that every single live event is driving in revenue and then can be expanded? So how do we have more of them then that continue to drive revenue and add in different sources, where it's like the decisions that are being made now just further silo us into the sponsorship pigeonhole. And now you're cutting ways to get sponsorship money, and you're relying purely on viewership. Whereas the things that I'm trying to suggest, sure, they might take away from viewership because you're getting more like say you have an arena of 2,000 people that are there, or even 1,500 that's taking 1,500 viewers away, quote unquote. But what revenue per head are you driving on that? If you can turn these live events into profitable events, they don't have to be in arenas. Like if you communicate with the audience, if you let us know, hey, we're not going to go to NRG Stadium where we're only going to use a fourth of the arena because that's overpaying the ever-living shit out of it. Go to a smaller theater. Go to something that is only 6,000 to 7,000, like Hulu Theater, Madison Square Garden, something like that, or like just anything where we can actually go out and consistently fill up, consistently drive revenue, have sponsorships help cover the costs there, and just you got to find other ways of making this profitable while still growing viewership. And I think that's the biggest problem right now. Watch parties and everything else, I mean, I'm trying my best to get those through. It's like, exactly, viewership. But the thing is, like, the viewership angle that they're taking right now is not even a good sponsorship revenue either. You're not going to increase sponsorship revenue with any of these changes at all.
For sponsorships or something like that, but it really depends on the
arguably is going to make it worse.
I assume those are not really built out that way. This is something where again, like I would be willing to see. I'm sure best of threes sometimes leads to higher viewership in some situations and leads to lower in others. The nice thing about a full day best of one is that just strictly in terms of viewership, and again, maybe fans don't really love this, but it does seem to have worked so far, is that
it's worked so far, but there are
valleys
ways to
don't end
improve
up
it.
that much lower than the peaks, and the peaks can still be pretty good. So as a
Agreed,
result,
but if you
it's much more
never
likely
try
that someone
anything
goes,
new, how are you ever going to
this
find
game,
something
I don't
better?
really care about it, but I'll just leave it on the background while I wait for the next good game to start and they play a league game or something. Whereas if it's a full best of three of a not great team, they go, I'll just come back in 3 hours, and they close out completely. And so
That's why you have to do
one
what
of
the
reasons
LEC
that,
did and
best of
find a
threes
way to
just
filter out the
generally,
bad teams
can
so
be
that
more
the best of threes are more
dire,
interesting no matter
in
what.
terms of viewership, like lower lows, higher highs, and the average tends to be better for best of ones. And I think I can understand in a situation where you are making such a big change just about the day and time, maybe that's a bridge too far to also radically change the format along with it and all the viewership trends that go there. This is basically saying if we take what we're currently doing on Saturday, Sunday, and move it to Thursday, Friday, we think it'll actually be good. Whereas then, if you're also making a format change, you're saying not only that, but also blah blah blah. You know, you get the point. I can understand.
Fair. I mean, I do like that specific angle of isolating variables, trying to change one thing at a time. But I feel like if your data is strong enough that you can make this change in general and make broader changes on the ecosystem, I would think that your analytics and understanding with the community as you continue to talk with them and engage with them would be able to spot out the differences between everything. Land creation companies, yeah, all you got to do is go with the esports engine. That's it.
Why these changes are not coming immediately at the exact same time. Though I also know some people are just like, hey, fuck it, if you're gonna make the change, make all the changes. Moving on to the actual time slot, now that we've kind of covered weekday versus weekend, some of the pros, some of the concerns.
Here we go.
This was, I think, the most contentious one. A lot of people online said like, oh, well, I can understand moving weekend to weekday, which again, I even think I'm one of the few people who still is kind of pushing back against even that idea. But the time slot itself
agree.
is
I've
one
just
that
given up.
very contentious as well, because it's going to move to noon on the weekday when if you're a student, you can't watch if you're on the West Coast.
Oh, dude, imagine. I know I've suggested this before, but imagine we did like a college campus tour in spring. Oh, that'd be so nuts.
Working 9 to 5, can't watch. If you have extracurriculars after school or something, very difficult. It's hard to find a certain subset of group of people who can very easily watch these games. I was speculating, joking on Hotline League last night, like, well, I guess East Coast high school students who don't do any extracurriculars can just like finish and go home at 3 p.m. right away almost and maybe catch the whole day of games.
Yeah, because like I'm telling you now, I mean, granted, I know not everybody's a high school athlete, but extracurriculars exist like theater, etc., stuff like that. You're not getting home until 5 minimum on the East Coast, and then you have to eat dinner, typically with your family. Like very few high schoolers are getting out of that. So like the best case scenario is probably looking at like 7. And by that point, what, you're at the final game of it, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, final game of the day at 7 o'clock.
And obviously, this is heavily targeting European fans as well. The scheduling of which games happen when was also something that just leaked on Monday, and it was something that a lot of fans, I think, were clinging on to, that like the best games would happen later in the day to help North American fans. But if you are going this pie chart route, like I'm talking about, like it makes sense to throw those immediately as early as you can to, one, catch the European viewers' interest before they fall asleep or decide to do something else for the rest of the night, as well as the fact that like the way Twitch broadcasts work is it's very important to try and get viewers in quickly and have them stay in. It's something that is always true. It's why hosting's so powerful. Is like viewers sometimes leave it on a second monitor and forget, or like go up and do something else. And so you really do want to capture as many eyeballs basically as quickly as you can. And then you do want to maintain them. You don't want to front load the broadcast because then people will leave. You want to keep good entertainment throughout the broadcast, obviously, and it will peak and dip as games.
But you can have like a good matchup at first,
if you are going to
and then
start with
save your marquee matchup
games
at the
1
end.
and 2 to target the North American audience specifically.
No, you go like
then
banger
the
match
is, like, why not
1.
just start later.
You do what the NFL does. NFL will have. I mean, well, they mix it up consistently, but you go like a banger at the 1 o'clock game. 4:15 is the one that like people want to watch, but it's not necessarily a banger. And then you have and then your Sunday night game is your Sunday night game, like your prime time. There's a reason why it's called prime time, and our best game of the week should always be on at the very end, always.
The day, and so I think while I am very concerned about the start time, I
local
do
tourism
agree with the
revenue for
overall philosophy
esports
that
is.
If you really do think that
it
this
used
is
to
the
be a
best
stat
start
that
time,
Riot
then yes,
used to
put some
provide.
of the best games right out the gate right away. That does seem to align with everything that I kind of know about Twitch broadcasting and like what makes the most sense for live streams. for esports. Now, obviously, you want to like. There's a natural ramp that happens, just like in a lot of esports, like as a bracket goes on and stuff like that, or like a best of 5 gets tenser as the series goes. But like those are more like artificial necessities of the structure of what's happening, more than like what you should be doing for your broadcast. You do want to get people hyped pretty quickly. You do want a little bit of a lead in time too for people to discover that it's live. But when they click in, you want something interesting to be happening so that they actually.
You don't want to put your 2 worst games at the very end.
A decent click-through rate of like, hey, this is on. And so that's why it's important to have
T-Bone, I think it's probably going to be a while.
The final thing I'll say on this,
given everything else
European
going
fans
on,
are very important for the health of NA's viewership. This is something that is not talked about back in the day when we had those huge numbers. Everyone's like, why can't we get those numbers anymore? Why can't, like, we should get those numbers. We should try and get back to 300K average concurrence. And again, it's because the European fans were forced to watch us back then. I also think, to be fair, I think North America was more interesting than Europe back then by quite a bit. Every team had some huge, larger-than-life personalities. Voyboy, Scara, Saint Vicious, obviously the CLG with Hotshot or Chowster or Doublelift, TSM, like there were just like a plethora of really interesting personalities to follow kind of through.
In China and Korea, it's already started.
It was an 8-team league then. Like more than half of your teams had some personality that streamed and you had a really strong connection with.
And now we focus too damn much on competition. Oh, we have to compete at Worlds and like that's our only. No, bullshit. We don't need to compete at Worlds. We need to be entertaining. Entertainment over competition while still being in a competitive format. That's all that matters. Look at chess boxing. Is that the most competitive chess? No. Is it the most competitive boxing? No. But it's entertaining as shit.
In that sense, it's not quite as powerful as it was then, but that's why a lot of
Stop
European
giving
fans
a
did like
fuck about
this,
Worlds.
and we can try and recapture them.
Care about putting out an entertaining product,
noting that, again,
winning
EU
NA.
wasn't playing then, so even if you were more of a European fan than an NA fan, you may as well have watched then. And that's why I think it is important now to kind of keep those people in mind, that there are European fans that you want to make sure can still watch, because it does absolutely matter for the overall raw viewership number. The final nugget I'll throw into this is that you can talk data all you want, but sometimes the data does not accurately capture the true phenomenon that is occurring. And I think this is something that happens all the time in big companies, is they just want to cast the widest net as possible to capture the most fans, and you forget how important core fans are. There's a reason that core gamer started to become a bit of a meme. It got ridiculous, but like the idea that like this is targeted towards these people, or like this is our demographic. Like you can envision who this person is and who they're supposed to be, and they will, if you satisfy your biggest fans and give what will make your biggest fans happy first, and then worry about the second level or the third or that net. If you can keep your core fans happy, they will also help you cast that net. They will become ambassadors for your product. So
yes. Oh, thank you so much, Mark, for bringing this up and putting it in very elegant terms. The problem that you see a lot, and I remember this joke from iCarly, where it was like the TV producer dad was trying to create the next best show of like how to capture younger audiences while still appealing to older audiences and like literally everybody else. And it was a great example of like when you as he said, when you cast your net too big, when you try and go for everything, you end up losing everything. You lose the things that make you unique, that allow you to be pushed by all audiences. And it's one of those that like it feels like we're going for everybody, which if you're gonna do that, go for a fucking global league, please. Don't pander to NA and say that we're an NA league and make decisions that are not in the best favor of NA. You're making decisions that align best for your pockets, not for NA teams, not for NA fans. Focus on developing the small niche that is the North American MOBA audience. We are small, but we consistently pack stadiums. So that is enough of a core base for you to focus around, even if the viewership number might not necessarily look great. You have to fix all the stuff at once, not just do one thing at a time. And that requires the right people, the right decision making, and everything else around it, which is clearly not being done.
The big problem with this for me is not just like, okay, you can tell me that the numbers are all right, and maybe they are all true. Even like, and you can walk us through, hopefully in the future from Riot, about all the reasons that this makes the most sense. You do still have to kind of answer this more, I guess you could argue, philosophical approach of you are hurting a lot of the people that were your biggest fans. I can't say the number of times I've seen on Reddit, DMs, just tweets, like, people who have said that, like, I've watched every day for the last 5 years, 10 years, and I can no longer watch. This sucks. And these are the kind of people who were a lot of times the most vocal proponents of not just league in North America, but North American league in North America. There will be a lot of maybe European eyeballs on the league that previously weren't watching because it's at a nice time slot for them now. But are they really fans of North American league, or do they just want something to watch?
Exactly.
And while that might not matter
exactly. That is, again, the difference between a passive and an active audience.
For viewership growth or decline, when you talk about 3 years, 5 years, who's tuning in for regional finals if it now is conflicting with Europe? Who's cheering for us internationally? You know, like
you never the 80-20 rule always needs to be remembered. 20% of your audience pays for 80% of everything that happens. And 80% of people only pay for 20. They're your cash cows or the super fans. Don't piss them off. Find a way to balance everything.
You are keeping this big pie chart, but
that's your Ari, your Lux, and your skin selling champions, your cash cows. It's the reason why you keep feeding them.
Is getting things that are not really core demographics well satiated in terms of what they want to be watching. You just kind of lose them, and in the long term, that is a big concern for me. Even if the initial day one viewership is not a concern, I do think this is something that we'll have to keep the finger on the pulse of from Riot to make sure that, like, hey, your North American actual audience isn't being left behind. The kind of X-factor looming over all of this is Valorant. They are the new players in the ecosystem, and they are getting some consideration in all the decisions being made here, given the fact that obviously Riot included them in these discussions. Now, when this news was kind of leaked months ago, people really thought it was all just because of Valorant. And I don't think this article necessarily went as hard as possible about dissuading the fact that this was heavily influenced by Valorant, given the fact that, they did include that one thing that said, hey, only 9% crossover between these games. That's really not that significant when you're talking about potentially 20-30% for just the broadcast themselves and moving time slots around. It doesn't feel like a 9% crossover is something you're really going to make decisions based on. And I think
that's fair, which I'm fine with that.
Put that data point in there, but maybe they could have phrased it a little stronger that, like, Valorant is not the reason numerically we're making these choices.
Well, Valorant is the reason why you're moving NA. You can say that it's to separate the day changes, but why would you separate LCS onto Thursday, Friday instead of the LEC, which is a stable product? What if we need the weekends? What if we need that lead in that the LEC will give us for Saturday, Sunday, Monday? Oh, but that's because of Valorant. Because it's a combination of factors, not just anything independently.
But I do really think that's the case, where it's not like, oh, well, Valorant, we're worried about crossover. Like, there's no reason in theory that if you really thought that Saturday, Sunday, noon start time for LCS was best and also best for VCT, just strictly from a viewership angle, 9% crossover is not enough to then move one of those out of that way. I think they could have phrased that a little bit stronger, but I do think that is true. And so because of that, most of the changes that happen can be qualified.
It's mostly not due to it, but it does play a factor.
For Valorant, they all kind of track based off the reason that Riot provided. They could still be wrong, of course, but at least, like, you don't really need to factor Valorant in for why you might move NA and EU further away from each other, like we've talked about. That said, it's not fair to say that Valorant doesn't factor into it, though. Just because you can justify these without them doesn't mean that this also isn't a bit of a concern, because what is happening is that Valorant and the LCS, and I believe this is true for EU as well, are using the same studios going forward. And that means that you literally cannot physically stack these broadcasts on top of each other because you're using a lot of the same personnel and physical spaces to make this kind of stuff happen. And so as a result, yes, someone does have to get to the, like, prime time slot. I think Riot is trying to say that this is not the prime time slot for NA anymore, for League of Legends at least, and so that it's not like they're fighting for prime time slot. But let's say they're wrong and you want to go back on the weekend. Well, guess what? Valorant is still there.
I was going to say, you can't change it.
You're not about to kick out the new kid on the block who's doing pretty well. Hats off to them. I'm just not personally a fan. But, like, that you're not going to be able to move them just because, like, this experiment didn't work. And in that sense, this is one of the things that I have not really seen talked about a ton, but the contingencies available for the NA broadcast,
non-existent,
should this not go well, is pretty minimal. There's not really much you can do to change this blowback or system without radically changing.
You literally have to go on the road. like if this fails, you have to go on the road and find a way to make that work because you're not getting the LCS studio back. And until the broadcast center up in Seattle is finished. This has the potential to be so damning when it's all done.
Format as well. Maybe that is when you go best of 3 and spread it out over the
me.
weekend. But you can't get the slot back now. At least not for the foreseeable future, or unless something changes. I
not
mean,
for
I don't
at
know
least
the
a year,
internal
minimum.
politics and
At least a year.
levels, so maybe it is more fluid than I think from the outside looking in. This is pure speculation, not me saying this as a Riot employee. Not even an employee, as someone who works with Riot. But like,
I was gonna say he's a contractor. There's most of them, I'd imagine, do not work, well, freelance, whatever you want to call it. Like, most of them do not work directly for Riot, but they work in collaboration with them, which is why this is so daunting.
This, to me, seems like this is the plan going forward.
If he worked for
LCS,
Riot, this video would not
LEC
exist.
is doing quite well, so they get that time slot. And the EU Valorant League, I don't really even know the terms. Like, they are not doing well enough to want to move the LEC away.
Over under 15% that an LCS org sues Riot in the next 15 years. Now, Riot, I guarantee Riot's legal team already knows everything. I mean, sure, if you want to argue breach of contract, like if they devalued their franchise spot by Riot making an executive decision, technically you have that possibility in there, but like, you signed the LCS franchise agreement that gave you no collective power in this situation. That is nothing but your fault. Literally nothing but your fault.
And so, yeah, they have to take the weekdays where the LCS is. And so those who...
And it's not even just about, like, the lawsuit they would have to prove that Riot intentionally made this decision to screw over the league and that they didn't have enough legal standing to make the decision. And you're not going to be able to pull that off because all the data, like everything that Riot's putting out right now, is nothing but protection. That in the case that it fails is like, you know what? Well, it was dying anyways and we took a chance. And here's all of our data points to back up the decisions that we made. We took this chance. We're sorry that it didn't work out, but it's not like you were doing anything to fix it either. Like, there's zero chance that an LCS org would win this legal battle at all. So you can't do anything.
Things are kind of happening at the same time. For the LCS, it just wasn't doing well enough. It was already competing with EU, and it was getting moved for its own reasons, so it's easy to slot the NA Valorant in there, the VCT. But then that means, of course, for the same reasons that you don't want NA and EU in league stacked on top of each other, that's true for Valorant as well. We'll see how long that lasts, because, again, that's how a league was when it started as well. I don't know if people don't remember or they just think it's no longer true because viewership trends have changed or anything. But back in the day, yeah, we fully separated broadcast days, and eventually it was decided that that was actually not better for the products. Is history repeating itself or is it different? We'll just actually have to find out.
History is just
Anyways, that's
repeating
going to do it for this
itself.
episode of The Blame Game.